Pirate, which is the title of this little pink book everyone's been asking me about all day. It was written, in fact, yes, by this guy, Sam Conniff, who couldn't be here today. But if he was here, he would tell you that the book can pretty much be summed up in one sentence. This one: the way things are is not the way things have to be. Which sounds kind of simple and quite obvious, actually. But how much do we really believe it? How much do we believe in our own power to actually change things? Before I worked with Sam, I started with him in January this year and became right-hand pirate. That is actually my job title on LinkedIn. I worked here at the RSA, which some of you might be familiar with. Like Nesta, it does loads of really interesting research into social change. And I spent a good 6 years sort of talking about how to fix the world. And then, during that 6 years, of course, Brexit happened. And I was, like many of us, I'm sure, just looking around going, what? Like, where is the plan here? And where are the grown-ups? Where is the leadership? And it dawned on me, in the same way that it dawned on Sam when he was writing this, that, in fact, no one's coming to save us. Traditional leadership is totally failing. And I think that we've kind of had enough of inspiration. I certainly had, and I think that the only way out of this is to stop talking about our good ideas and to actually take some action. I think everything will depend on our ability to make our ideas real. That's what starting to lead really is. I mean, leadership is an activity, as we've heard today, but it's also a choice. So, I want to introduce to you some heroes of mine that stand next to these guys, the ordinary people who did take action, who looked to their conscience, did the wrong thing for the right reason. The rule breakers are the people that we celebrate, only in hindsight. You know where I'm going with this. Pirates. Not the Pirates of the Caribbean. That's Disney kind of messing the whole thing up. I'm talking about the Golden Age pirates, your Henry Morgan and Blackbeard. And pirates were originally just young professionals. They were a group of sailors who looked around at the system and realized that they had no power and no voice. And so they jumped ship, quite literally, and formed crews of their own. The average age of a pirate was about 28, and the average size of a crew was 80, which is really bad odds against the Navy of like thousands. So pirates had to do something. They had to innovate. And all that innovation really means, although we use it as such a buzzword, innovation is just doing things differently. And what that meant in this period of history, which was really violent and ruled by hierarchy and punishment, was that they had to look after each other. And I'm going to give you a really quick rundown of just how they did that. On a pirate ship was where you found the first form of social insurance. If you lost a leg or an eye in battle, you were compensated. You got 8 pieces of 8. Pirate crews were actually diverse. They were the only place in the Western world at the time that you'd have seen freed slaves and women working alongside men as equals, because they knew that talent was the only thing that was going to get them where they needed to get to, which was survival. They had the first form of dual governance, which arguably isn't working anymore, but they did pioneer this. The captain and the quartermaster were equals. The captain was in charge of strategy and the quartermaster in charge of culture. I'm the quartermaster, by the way, to Sam. They also had universal suffrage, which made them more democratic than ancient Greece. Everybody had a say on board. And it wasn't like a moral argument, this. It was simply survival. They knew that in order to stop conflict from breaking out, they really had to give people equal say. They had pay equality and pay transparency. Everybody knew what everybody earned. And the captain typically only earned 2 to 4 times more than the rest of the crew, which is like such a gulf compared to, again, what we are seeing today. They had self-organizing teams, so they were really dynamic and really agile. They could scale up and scale down with other pirate crews really quickly and easily because they had to. They even pioneered same-sex marriage, which I know is remarkable, but they created these ritual ceremonies on board, recognizing that the love between people of the same sex was a real thing. And they also were pioneers of telling their tale. Pirates weaponized their story. If you saw the skull and crossbones on the horizon, you knew to back off. And it was a way of enabling them to be less violent. They were probably the least violent people on the sea at the time. And all of these principles of like fairness and equality had practical applications which they locked down in the pirate code. This was a real written document, despite what Pirates of the Caribbean says, and it held them accountable. They had really high levels of trust and accountability on board, and crucially, the pirate code helped them to make decisions quickly. So, my challenge to you is to think about your own principles. Unfortunately, in our organizations, we have veered towards a kind of vague values culture that is pretty meaningless to most of us as individuals. So my first challenge is this. What are you really willing to stand up and fight for? Or to put it a different way, what gets you out of bed in the morning? Like, what will you make sacrifices for? You've got about 4 minutes to talk to the person next to you. Great. So I'm just going to ask a couple of people what they said on their groups. So Nadine? Over here, yep. Mike's?
Hello. Yes. Lots of different ideas. Social injustice was one of them, human lives, and more personal things like my children and my family.
Esther? Facilitator? Yeah.
What gets you up in the morning? Well, I co-founded a new business this year, so that gets me up early in the morning and usually to bed late as well. And the reason for that is to make care work a sought-after profession, and make it the value. So really see this valuable work for what it's worth, and that's what motivates me.
Great. Actually, the reason why Sam isn't here is because we have a code between us. We decided this right at the beginning, that we would live what we were talking about. So one of the principles is that we have each other's back. And when he had a very well-deserved break, and had been working really hard, traveling all over the place, instead of him racing back to do this today, he was like, you'll just step up and do it instead. So we knew that it was working because it was helping us to make decisions. But when I started working with Sam back in January, it was about the same time that he was launching the book in the US. And he really wanted to sort of walk the walk and fly the flag in how he launched it. And so he started thinking about how can I make a splash in the US market. And he started researching, who are the biggest book readers in America. And it turns out that it's Ryan Gosling, Bill Gates, and Gary Vee. And turns out it's also really hard to get your book to them. But then he thought, well, maybe I don't actually have to get my book physically to them. I could just Photoshop it in. And so, he did that and tagged all the fan clubs. And people, a lot of people thought it was real, even though he was like, I got the worst, I thought it was the worst Photoshop job in the world. But it worked, and the book started to, sell a bit better over there. Obviously, the publishers were like, okay, you've had some fun, but stop now. And so there's this pirate hack that we usually spread at these events. That sometimes when you hear no, you should just pretend you heard go. And so it's like, where can I go with this next? And I was like, this is literally the point when I was about to sign my contract, start working with him. I thought, this guy's a nutter. What am I doing? But nothing happened. No one cared, basically. And so I started the job, and I got handed this email folder with about 800 emails in of people, unresponded to emails, bit of a backlog. But they were amazing, and there were things like this guy, "Ahoy Sam, I want you to know how much your book influenced me. I'm breaking some rules and creating some scary but necessary change." And this guy is sort of handing in his resignation. This amazing woman called Natalie Clarkson, who read the book and found the courage off the back of it to challenge the Home Office and get her friend freed from an immigration detention center. And then it was on social media as well. There's this kind of outpouring of we want to be pirates. This guy, Fogdog1. And they grew, and eventually the demand came, Sam, if you don't hold a meetup with all of us pirates, we'll just do it without you. And so as soon as I started, that is exactly what we did. We held a meetup on the replica pirate ship by London Bridge, the Golden Hind, which is a terrible place to hold an event, by the way. It's really hard work, but it was an amazing night and a completely other story. And then I started to really talk to all the people who were writing these messages and try and understand, like, okay, what does this all mean? And I could see the stories move from just intention to action. There's this amazing guy called Jim Edmondson who really wants to completely rewrite the rules of finance and make finance a force for good in the world. So he's created this new environmental fund that only invests in green startups. This guy, Robbie, who has completely recreated a new advertising agency with some ethics and has based it all on his pirate code. And he's getting rid of all sorts of admin that he felt was holding him back. These guys at Tradecraft, incredible organisation that pioneered fair trade in the UK 40 years ago, but now that fair trade is mainstream, they kind of lost their mission. So we've been doing some workshops with them, and they're completely reinventing themselves. But they started with the question of, what are we really going to fight for here? Like, should we even exist? And so I was trying to make sense of what all this meant, what it amounted to. How do you be more pirate in practice? What does it mean? And this phrase came up over the last year, which Sam had started using, even though it's not in the book, this professional rule breaking. And professional rule breaking is a realization that a lot of the rules we have at work are just norms, assumptions, bad habits, and precedents that are well past their sell-by date. And if we're really going to start to take action, we have to get rid of them. But to do that, we have to move away from permission-based change. And so, the next challenge to you guys. What rule do you want to break? What needs to change? 2, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Again, talk to your neighbour. I'm going to ask a couple more people what rule they want to break. We're going to go with Alice. Alice, yes, great.
Okay, we had quite a good discussion. My favourite was not working for a big organisation, and some organisations were named, but I won't repeat them. And instead to...
Repeat them.
Maybe later. Instead to create more grassroots social movements, because big organisations are scared of taking risks, apparently.
Okay. And Louise E.
I think I found you a pirate.
I don't know where you guys are.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Hello, my name's Heather Henry. I'm a nurse that invents things with local people. I work for myself. And I'm working on an idea around people-powered asthma education for children. And I went to see about 6 people in the NHS where I live and told them my idea and asked them for a very small amount of money, and they said no. And they've referred me to another 6 people who will probably also say no, because I don't have any impact measurements. However, I live in Sale, and I went to see my ward councillor on Saturday and asked him for his help, and I've also asked a number of older people who go into schools and read stories to children, and I've written some children's story. So I'm going to do it without the NHS's help whatsoever, apart from if in a year's time they want to measure things like A&E admissions or attendances, or possibly even my own doctor measuring whether there are any urgent asthma appointments, and see whether I can do it without them. And probably I'll find other investors in the future and beyond the NHS who believe in me. Thank you.
Thank you. Say it. One of the rules that I heard recently, which I really liked as a rule to break, was just the other day, someone in HR talked to us and she said, do you know what, I just want to stop putting competitive on the salaries when we do job descriptions and job applications. Don't you think people have a right to know how much they're going to get for the work that they're going to do? So I was like, go in and stop writing it. Every time just stop writing it. And yeah, I thought that was a really good modern work rule that we probably ought to break. So the reason actually that Sam and I really wanted to do today was because the biggest, the loudest, clearest cry to be more pirate has come from health and social care. I think to his complete surprise. It's really been like these guys, every day tweeting, talking about stuff that they're doing, forming a pirate council up in Manchester. And so it's really been them that I've been listening to understand, you know, what needs to change. So now I'm going to just introduce you to Claire Tompkinson from Manchester Community Central. It's Claire, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the rules that she has broken and has been breaking for the last 3 years.
So I'm Claire. I work in Manchester for a small charity called MAC. We're the Voluntary and Community Sector Support Organisation. So it's our job to work with and support and develop the 3,500 voluntary organisations across the city. And my job specifically is to link them up with health and wellbeing and look at different ways of working together across sectors. We've been doing some work for about 3 years when I came across the book Be More Pirate. I don't know if Ollie Benson's still in the room. It was his fault. He introduced us to it. So we read the book and kind of came up with the realisation that we're pirates. What we're doing is piracy. In the city, we are pirates. And we completely embrace that of the sense of the way things are, the way we work, the way we work across sectors, and not the way that they have to be. And I will say, if you've got kids and you go home and say, actually, I'm going to be a pirate at work, they think it's really, really cool, and suddenly you kind of go up a little bit in their estimation, until you get a phone call from school saying that apparently my 7-year-old had told her teacher that mum doesn't go to work anymore, mum's a pirate instead, but drinks gin all day because she doesn't like rum. So that went down pretty well. But about 3 years ago, we were doing some work with Hospital Trust, with the Manchester Foundation Trust, and we got some funding from the NHS Leadership Academy to look at systems leadership approaches across Manchester and to try and look at a different way of working across sectors. We kind of knew exactly why we wanted to do that. We knew we were about to embark on a period of change in the city. 3 years ago, we were just starting the conversations about devolution in Greater Manchester. But we weren't sure if the leadership style, cultures, behaviours were ready to kind of work in that new way. And everyone was talking, as we've talked today, self-managed teams, distributed leadership, collaboration. But what we were still seeing was people holding on very closely to that power and control. And the language was changing, but the practice and the way people wanted to work wasn't really. And what we really wanted to do was redefine what we meant by leadership, so it's more distributed, collaborative. We wanted to not just share power, but actually how to create a bit of our own power with communities as well. And particularly from my point of view, we wanted to know what leadership looked like across sectors and how we could bridge that gap between the NHS and the voluntary sector. What we didn't quite figure out was how we were going to do it or what we were going to do, which gets up to the first rule that we broke, really. Because I think when you first get a funding bid, you write a plan, you write a strategy, you come up with some timescales, you write some outcomes, you decide what we're going to measure. And that didn't really feel right. So we went back to the Leadership Academy and we were like, thanks very much for this funding, but actually we're not going to do any of those things at all. Because if this is about collaborative leadership and we as a small group of leaders make all of the decisions and decide now how we're going to spend that money, fundamentally we're going to be part of the problem that we've identified and that we overcome. We want this piece of work to be led by our participants who are everywhere, but we don't know who they are yet, and making that decision now feels wrong. So I remember quite clearly going back to our chief executive and saying, right, we're going to the Leadership Academy, we're going to say thanks for the money, we're not writing a plan, we've got no timescales, no objectives, we don't know what we're measuring, and every single person that I've spoke to said they're fed up of meetings, they're fed up of terms of reference, they're fed up of action plans, they want to go to the pub and get to know each other. And I remember my chief exec kind of going, if you think that's the right thing to do, then I will trust you to get on with it, which is where our career in professional rule breaking kind of started. And that was really, really scary, because I think sometimes when you think about the traditional leadership approach, there was a whole pressure on us to say, we're the leaders and we know what to do. And we were very honest and put ourselves in quite a vulnerable position of saying, we've got this vision and this idea of what we want to achieve and what we think leadership should look like in a couple of years' time, but we don't know how to do it. We want to pull a whole group of people together and just have a different conversation with people who don't normally have the opportunity to come together. So we really embraced the thought of leaders don't have all the answers. It's not up to us to write a plan and agree targets. And we called it an emerging strategy, but what we meant was actually we want to make it up as we go along and see that as a strength and not a weakness. It's absolutely the right thing to do. And like I said, the usual approach to project management would have made us part of the problem, because I think we project manage the life out of absolutely everything. And some things we were talking about before, that is absolutely necessary. But in some places, when you're talking about complex issues that emerge from working across systems, putting that command and control, leaders have the answers, we're the smart people, we've wrote a plan, everyone needs to go and implement the plan, would have been the wrong thing to do. And we would have squashed the life out of it before we even started. So our job was to find our band of rebels. So we opened it up to absolutely everybody. If anyone was interested, come along and join us, because we felt that collectively, whether people worked in housing, the ambulance service, someone with lived experience, someone within the communities, volunteers, voluntary sector organisations, we had GPs, consultants, anyone you could ever imagine, we brought together as equals. And we had no power, no positional power or authority over anybody in that room. And we brought together about 200 people over a year's period. But we brought them together because they agreed with our vision and what we wanted to achieve, not because we were in charge and were telling them that this is what they needed to do to improve the leadership style and culture across the city. We organised ourselves around the principles of shared values, common purpose, a vision, and what were our values that underpinned it all, without having one single meeting and no action plans at all. And we did kind of say to the Leadership Academy, we'll have about 10 little projects, self-organising teams of people who are working on things that are important to them. And by the end of the year, we had 100 with no action plans, no measuring impact. It was just people connecting around something that was important to them and being left with the freedom to get on with it themselves through a real heavy emphasis on relationships, behaviours, values and trust. And they owned it, so they went with it. And we've really found that leadership isn't about power, position, status or job title. It's about how you work collectively with other people, and that anyone can be a leader if you're capable of working together to create a change. So yeah, I was asked to talk a little bit about fear. It felt quite scary and uncomfortable. We talked a lot about imposter syndrome, and really that's fine. And we kind of had a bit of a sense of, if you're in your job and you're creating change and you're innovating and you feel like you're doing well and you get it and it's easy and everyone agrees with you and you're cracking on with it, you're probably not doing it as well as you think you are. And there's something about being vulnerable and saying that if this is really, really hard and you don't feel like you belong and you feel like the person in a meeting branded a troublemaker because no one agrees with what you're saying, then you're probably the person who's creating the most change. And without those people in those rooms and without building that support network to bring them together, the conversation never changes. And I think we are in a position where the conversation has to change, because we have a view of leadership that just doesn't work for us anymore, particularly looking at the new challenges that we're facing. So I think my message is follow the energy, build a movement, bring together people who are motivated to create change. Do your job. It's really important to do a good job, but it's equally as important to be a part of a bigger system, and you can't do that on your own. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I take daily inspiration from like the pirate crew that we are forming. So we know kind of roughly what we believe in, and we know what might need to change. The third challenge is maybe the hardest one to be honest about, I found. What do you allow to get in your way? So I want to take a few minutes for you guys to talk about that. What do you really think is stopping you from doing what Claire did? 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Great. Going to hear a couple more. Got Raj? Over? Yep. A mic?
Would you like to share?
Thank you. We had two, actually. So, the first one was people who don't share your vision, obstructive individuals, and you have to find a way of working with people like that. How do you work around them, or do you work with them, or you get them to change their mind? That was our first one. And our second?
Just quite simple. Fear of the unknown. This can be get in the way.
Great. And Robin, keen to go to another table?
Thank you. So we spoke a lot about fear as well, not wanting to lose things that you value, sometimes your job or relationships with others on your team, getting burned in the past, and there was a bit of conversation about it being easier to challenge outside of your organization sometimes than within your own team.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. So Sam and I have done this session with lots of different organizations now, from corporates to teachers, public sector, charities. And it almost always, this question always boils down to two things when you really get into it: fear and admin. It's I've got too many meetings, too many emails, it's too much process, I've got loads of paperwork, I've got to do a spreadsheet, got to do a presentation, can't possibly do anything else. Or I'm afraid of what my colleagues will think, I'm afraid of losing my job. Even if you don't really know if you can get fired for it. And it's always these two things that get in our way. We think that our common enemies are the things that come up in the beginning, the inequality and the injustice, and climate change. But actually humans are fairly good at solving big problems. What's stopping us is the real common enemy. It's the admin and the fear. So now I want to introduce to you another pirate from our crew. Veronica Yates has inspired me from day one. She is the director of the Child's Rights International Network, and she's going to come and just talk to you a little bit about what she did to turn pirate. Veronica.
Hi. So I usually introduce myself as a self-loathing charity, because deep down I don't actually think charity is working. It's necessary, but it doesn't change the status quo. It didn't give women the vote, charity didn't end slavery and many other injustices. But unfortunately, it's necessary. So as a self-loathing NGO, I thought we need to change who we are as a small children's rights organization. And I wanted to do it involving all my colleagues. So I thought, let's do something different and collaborative, and let's start asking ourselves whether we really need to exist as an organization. I thought it was innovative, but it turned out, of course, we need to exist. We all were convinced we needed to exist. All of us who work in the care charity sector, we are convinced that we need to exist. So it didn't quite give me the solutions I wanted. So I thought we should maybe turn the question on its head, and I got all my team together, and I said to them, we're going to write an exit strategy. We have 6 months, we're going to close down, and anything that we think is valuable that we do, we're going to hand it over to others, be it academia, public health sector, other NGOs, the United Nations, you name it. And we did that, and it was amazing, because we all actually managed to get rid of 80% of the work we've been doing for almost 2 decades. And what was left was the one thing that we could not hand over to anyone was the radical policies that we've been focusing on for years, which also happened to be what we were most proud of. And then we talked to external collaborators and partners and asked them, what is it that they value about us? And they said, it's your fearlessness, your radical positions. And we thought, this is great. We have something really useful here, and this is what we should focus on. So then we found this book, and reading the book, I thought, but we don't want to now write a stupid 5-year strategy or business plan or whatever. There's no way I'm going to the board to write another 5-year strategy. So we wrote a power code, and we did it together as a team, and the code includes justice, equality, rights, not charity. We talk about, we're for feminism, not patriarchy, but it also expresses our values as an organization. We have flexible workplace policies, we have an environmental policy, etc. And so we adopted the code, and we were pretty proud of our code and thought this is really innovative, but then we had to actually implement the code. And that's really where the challenge came in, because writing the code was really fun, we were all involved, we thought this is collaborative. The board were convinced because you know, they saw the code and they were like, this is actually really cool. I'm now actually pretty proud to be part of this charity. But putting into practice is really hard because it requires us to change. But we couldn't have changed without the code. So practicing what we preach means we have to change our behaviors. It's not going to be a software that we implement or something like that. It really needs to be changed. So the way we have done some of the changes are we've just become a 4-day-week organization. Woohoo! We have also, for example, one of the collaborative things we do is that all staff now write their own job descriptions, and others can then comment on the job description, and we then have a team meeting discussing it. We are now able to say no to donors because we've decided, you know what, we want to stay small. We don't want to be a big NGO. Big NGOs are ineffective. Small is more effective, and we don't want to take money to do work that doesn't fit with our code. That was probably one of my proudest moments when I was able to say to one of our donors, no thanks. We wouldn't do this work if we had the money to do it, so we're not going to do it. So I think one of the things that we are trying to do now with this code is try and write how we did it and how others can actually contribute to it. Because whether we work in a human rights field or other, it's something that can be adopted by others. And so I guess this is what I wanted to talk about, and hopefully it will give you some ideas on, you know, how you can also do that in your organization. And do get in touch, because we'd love to talk to you about your codes as well.
So I'm going to have to go at speed now because we are already running over. So the final challenge to everybody. You know what you believe in, you know what needs to change, you know what's getting in your way. So now what are you going to commit to? And I'm going to caveat this with 2 things. Think of not a big problem that needs to change. Think of a small, bold action that you could do tomorrow, because it really matters to just start. As I said at the beginning, I think we've kind of done with inspiration. I think we need to just do something. So my question is, what is your new rule? What are you going to commit to? And if you could, write down your email address on the postcard that you have been writing on so far. What Sam and I will do is hold you to account, if you want to be held to account on this, because this is what we go in and do. We say, you're going to commit to something. Somebody external is going to have to hold you to it to follow through. So we've got actually 2 minutes for the last question. Let's go. So for the final feedback, I'm going to ask Halima over here.
The rule that I was going to break was around what counts as being a health issue, because I think all of us in this room have pushed that boundary actually over the past few years. If we think about the people-powered health agenda is pushing outwards in terms of what counts, out into well-being and social connectedness. So my rule I was going to break is the idea that there is a health sector over here and a climate change sector over there, and they are separate. Because I think the idea that there is a climate sector is a rule that we need to break now, just in terms of the urgency of what needs to happen. So my new rule is that all of our work is going to, we're going to try and make all of our work informed by climate change.
Great, good rule. And breaking down silos is like a big thing that comes up every time. So I'm also going to go to Alex, over here.
Hello, thank you. My new rule, I think, is to recognise that all systems and cultures are upheld by tiny individual micro-actions, and that in an age of inclusion, everybody has a role to play to recognise their own privileges and prejudices within that context, and to never pass the buck and say that systems change is something that we can be passive in, because actually we all have a role to play in that, and to do so to make sure that I listen to as many voices in the room and beyond the room, particularly those that might not normally be heard, so that we can I can encourage other people to all adjust their micro actions as well, so that we can shift those cultures and systems so that they're more equitable for everybody.
Great. Thank you. So usually when we do this 4 questions exercise, we have a bit more time, and it's usually to a group of people who all work in the same place. And when we ask someone at the end to vocalize their new rule, we then ask the whole room, who agrees with that? Who thinks that this is sensible? And almost every time, everybody stands up, and you have what we would call a mutiny. And it's a way of forcing consensus from the bottom up. So if you do have any managers in the room at the time who kind of think that's not really the way that we do things around here, they can't really get out of this because everybody else agrees. And I have been thinking about the rules that need rewriting, and obviously listening to all the healthcare pirate crew and thinking about what professional rule breaking means. And professional rule breaking isn't about chaos or anarchy. It's about taking responsibility and reclaiming agency, because we really need to start doing it. We need to be accountable to these small, bold actions that we're going to take tomorrow. And I realize that the bad rules get made because they are made without the people they are actually for. And that's the biggest lesson that I've drawn from the healthcare guys. And I wanted to live that principle today by bringing in some other people into the talk and sort of try to share the stage. And I thought, really great idea, Alex, you're really going to smash this. And then the reality of actually planning the talk came in, and I thought, God, I realized that the scary thing wasn't going to be standing up to a big audience, because actually it's quite exciting. The scary thing was, the uncomfortable part was giving over part of the talk to someone else and realizing I couldn't control the success of it all, and getting over my ego, basically. And I felt like that was, the most important thing about leading. And I've sat here today and I've listened to everybody talk, and I think that I'm pretty sure that everybody here agrees with the principle of redistributed power, of leadership from the bottom up. I've heard loads being talked about building trust and building relationships. But I guess, if I'm honest, I'm not entirely convinced that we're doing it. I don't think that we're there yet. I think we've missed a trick. This is an amazing organizational feat to have all these people in the room from all these different places. And I think we could use this time to build the relationships and build the trust, and have something that was a bit different, maybe, and to not necessarily have experts and inspirational people on the podium and everybody else in the audience. And I really was hesitant about saying this because I really respect everybody here. But as soon as I knew that it was the one thing that I was kind of scared of saying, I knew I'd be a massive hypocrite if I didn't say it. Because, I guess, pirates really are the people who dare to go off the edges of the map and who will go where other people won't. And there's this old phrase that comes up in the book, and it's by Captain Flint. I don't really know who he is. He said this: in the darkness there is discovery, there is possibility, and there is freedom. And so that is where we need to be, in the darkness, not quite knowing what we're doing. But it is a lot easier if you can draw strength from a crew. And so that is what I'm trying to do with Sam, build a kind of movement or a community around Be More Pirate. We have a map now where you can anchor yourself to if you want to. And we have a very disjointed website with a few new pages on where you can kind of see what's going on, connect people. I've got 2 events coming up that you can get involved in, or just come and talk to me. I'm really open to building the crew and growing this. Thank you.